Hey, and welcome to another Tech Tuesday. This is Chad from Ascension Worship. This week I've got an interesting one. We're going to talk about master bus processing for your live stream, and in particular, an interesting thing for those of you who maybe do not have a digital board, or maybe you don't have a digital board with all the options on it that we're going to talk about here today. We are showing a way that you can use a Behringer XR, in this case XR18, as an outboard processor to do some of these things, which I think is kind of an interesting concept for some of us. So let's hop right in and get some audio examples going on. Okay, so here is my XR18 editor app, XR app that's going on. And what's happening is in the background, I'm running Logic, and I'm just playing back a section of audio, and I've mixed in Logic as if it was like a analog console. So I'm using very little compression, very little EQ, no reverb, and I'm sending a mix from Logic into my XR mixer. It's coming in on channels 1 and 2, and then a duplicate on 3 and 4. Now, the reason why the duplicate's in there is because during the course of this video, you'll see me soloing certain things, turning things on and off, that kind of thing. You are currently listening to the monitor output of the console. So right now, I've soloed. This channel has nothing on it so that I can talk and you don't hear the music going, but you can still see all the levels happening. From time to time, I will solo the before, which is the signal coming out of Logic, and then when nothing's soloed is when you'll hear the main out, which is the processed audio that's coming into channels 1 and 2. Okay, so let's hop right in. Here is the before when you hear me solo this, and then when I de-solo it or deselect it is when you'll hear the end result, and then we'll talk about how we got there. Cool. So let's talk about what's going on here, and then we'll kind of break it into pieces. So we've got level coming in to 1 and 2. And the first thing that we're doing is we're throwing a little bit of EQ on just to pull out some mids that are kind of offending in that mix. Again, we're not doing a lot of EQ in Logic. We're doing it all on our master bus just to kind of give you an idea of some things you could do with this. From there, you want to compress it. Now, you don't really want to use the channel compressor because that's a wideband compressor. It's listening to the entire mix. And that's not going to really handle very well with what we're doing today. So instead, what we're doing is if you hop over to the effects section, you can see I have inserted on channel 1 and 2 the stereo Combinator, which is a multiband compressor built into this mixer. From there, we are adding in a little bit of reverb. Typically, I wouldn't add reverb to an entire mix, but this can be a useful trick, as we'll show in here as we go. And then the combination of those two channels is then going to bus 1 and 2, where we are applying a bit of stereo spread effect through the Edison EX1. And then finally, that whole thing hits our master bus, where we have inserted the precision limiter, which is going to give us a substantial volume boost and then protect us from digital peak. So let's break this down a little bit. I'm going to turn off all these inserts. I'm going to turn the reverb down and turn the EQ off. We'll listen to the channel. This is effectively now the before version of this, and we'll turn these all on individually and kind of talk about some of the settings, and that'll be it for today. First off, you can see in my EQ here, I'm just pulling out some mids, particularly around 500 and 200 hertz, just to kind of get some of the honky mud unnecessary stuff out of there, just to kind of create space for the things that we want. So I'm not doing any boost, I'm just cutting out mids that we don't like. So what I'm going to do here is we'll zoom in a bit. Watch for this EQ button. When I press it in, that's when you're going to hear the effect. When it's gray is when we have the before signal. So that sounds like this. Cool, and to me that just sounds a lot cleaner sounding. The low end has a lot more punch because it's not really being muddled up with all that mid-range grossness. Okay, from there we are going to apply some compression. Again, the way we're doing that is we are in the effects window here, and we have inserted on channels 1 and 2 the stereo Combinator. Now, like I said, the benefit of using the Combinator versus just a regular bus compressor is that it breaks up our signal into, in this case, 5 different frequency bands and compresses each of those individually. Now, you can get really intricate in this. I've done this very, very quick and dirty. The way I did it is I went through and turned off SBC. SBC is the automatic gain compensation, basically, for how much we're compressing. And then I just simply turned down this effectively global threshold until we started seeing some compression happening. I was shooting for about 3 to 5 dB of compression on the reg. And then I made up for that by boosting up the entire signal 3 dB. Now, if you watch, you can see that most of our compression is happening in our low mids and low frequencies. And so what effectively ends up happening is it's kind of compensating for my mix being a little bit too bassy at the moment. And it's kind of turning down those frequencies that are a little bit out of control. And it's also, because we're boosting the entire signal, you should hear a bit of a volume boost overall, in particular in the high mids and the highs, so you can get a little bit more sparkle. It'll give you more of a kind of finished product kind of sound. Now, I've put these two mixers side by side here for a reason. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this on and off, not using the insert button. I'm going to actually use this bypass button here. And so you should see that these are the same exact level. This is the input, and then this is the output because of the way I have this positioned. When I turn off bypass, when this red light's turned off, you will hear what the Combinator is doing. And I want you to listen to the tonal difference, the volume difference, and also watch for the peak difference between the two. Because if I did it right, you won't see much, if any, volume boost visually, because this is showing us peak. Instead, you should hear it sound a little bit fuller, a little bit brighter, but without actually it being physically louder and peak, which is an important thing for later on. So let's get this where you can see a little bit of everything here. All right, here we go. So there you go. Not much difference in peak level, but it definitely sounds fuller and brighter to my ears. Okay, so we are now, we've processed our individual channels. Now we have the ability to add a little bit of reverb. Now, you don't want a lot of this. Generally, you don't want to add reverb at the end of a mix. But again, if you're on an analog console that maybe doesn't have a reverb unit, or you've run out of buses to be able to add that kind of thing, you can do it this way. You just want to be very, very subtle with it. You want to have it tucked into the mix to where you really only hear it when things are really soft. So I'm going to crank it up, let you hear what it's doing, and then I'm going to back it down substantially. You kind of want to back it down to where you almost can't hear it anymore, and maybe a tiny bit more, because we're going to emphasize it a little bit when we do our Brickwall limiting, and that's usually where you want it to sit. So let's take a listen to that. Cool. And that's where I've been setting it, is around -20, a little bit lower than that. That's usually a good point. And of course, you'd want to listen to this when your pastor is speaking as well. Make sure that it's not confusing, or you will make sure it's a good thing when they're on stage. Okay, so we've got our channel with multiband compression and EQ. We've got our reverb. Both those are feeding into buses 1 and 2. And on bus 1 and 2, we have this guy, the Edison EX1, which is giving us some stereo spread. So let's talk about what that is and why you would want it and what we're going to go for here. So first off, the mix that I'm presenting to you guys doesn't have a ton of stereo elements to it. If you're sending a mono mix in, this is not going to help you. Don't play with it. But if you are actually doing a stereo mix, this can, again, kind of help to give you a more professional, fuller sound. So what we're doing is we have the stereo spread options set up at 20. I find that when you do that, the low mids become a little bit overwhelming again. So I've brought them down to -30. The output gain is set down a little bit to -1, because this plugin will make your entire mix a little bit louder, and you don't want to trick your ears into thinking it sounds better just because it's louder. You want it to sound better because it sounds better and has a better stereo spread to it. So here's what you want to listen for. This is very, very subtle. But what's going to happen, I want you to listen to the clarity of the low mids. Hopefully it'll sound like it's cleaner when we turn this on. And then also listen for some of the top end sparkle stuff in the far outsides of the mix. So if you have headphones on, you'll probably hear this okay. If you're on an iPhone, probably not, but maybe. So what's going to happen is, especially there's a synth line in the background that's just kind of an arpeggiated line, that to me is one of the most obvious things that sticks out when I turn it on this mix. You'll probably, the three things that are in stereo in here are the synths, the electric guitars, and the reverbs. But mostly the synths, and then another part of the track is the percussion. Those are the things you're probably going to hear the most. So again, listen for those, and listen for the low mid quality when I turn this on. So we'll start with it off. Here we go. Cool. And I felt like the bass guitar, which is a little bit overly prominent in this mix, kind of gets cleaned up a little bit when that's on there too. Okay, finally, we've got the precision limiter. I've done a few videos on this now, so hopefully you have an idea of what this does. But what's happening is this is a Brickwall limiter, meaning that it's taking our overall peaks and we're pushing our level into a ceiling. The ceiling is protecting us from digital peak. And so we end up with a hotter, louder, thicker signal that is also at the same time protected from digital distortion, which is really important when we're streaming online. So what's happening here is I've got a substantial boost of 16 dB, which is a lot. And you should be able to see, in fact, I'm going to go ahead and turn it on now. You can see when big hits are happening, especially on like the snare drum, we're getting GR, which is gain reduction happening. That gain reduction is just shaving off the initial transient, the biggest hit part of the snare that our ears kind of naturally fold over but in a digital mix, that can take up a lot of your headroom. Now, by shaving that off, we have more room to boost the signal up, and the idea is that you want this to sound good even when you're listening to it on an iPhone that doesn't have a very big, loud speaker. You don't want to have to crank up the entire mix the whole time you're listening to it. You want it to sound good at like 3/4 volume. So that's the idea, that by trimming some of that unnecessary transients off the top of this, we have the ability to boost the entire mix and get a lot more volume. Now, the reason why my output gain is set at the inverse, so it's set at -16, is because otherwise this is going to blow your head off when I turn it on. So there's some post-processing that you're not seeing that I'm doing in the background just to make this a fair example when we're doing things. But when you go to actually do this in the real world, you'd want your output gain set at like -1 or -0.5 so that you're getting the strongest signal possible, but still leaving some room for protection. If you're using this going out into an analog device like an ATEM switcher, then you're going to use your master volume that we see over here as a means of attenuating this so you're not peaking out the input on that device. That might be something for another video later on. But you'd want to have this set with your input gain set up to where you're getting some gain reduction and your output gain set to like -1 or -0.5. The other settings I just did really quickly, I put 30% squeeze, which is like a low-level compressor that just kind of helps to thicken up the mix a little bit. And then I very simply just turned the other three things all the way down. So we got a very fast attack, very fast release, and that sounds pretty good to my ear. So we'll go ahead and turn that off, and then we'll listen to the mix. I'll turn it on and off. And again, you won't hear, the main thing this is doing is a huge volume boost. You're not going to really hear that. You're going to hear the compression, and you'll be able to see some things around here. Listen in particular to the snare drum. I think the snare drum is the most affected part of this as we're going. So again, listen to the snare, how much it is sticking out of the mix when this is not on, and how much it's kind of glued into the mix when it is on. How long the snare drum seems to sound, because when it's not on, you're getting that very big hit, and then it seems to kind of duck away. So with this on, to me, it kind of makes the whole thing fatter sounding. And then finally, the reverb on the snare, even though it's very, very subtle, part of the reason why we turned it down so much is when you turn this effect on, it does bring the reverb more to the surface, because now the distance between the reverb and the transient hits of the snare have been reduced, and then everything's been brought up, so the reverb's more apparent than it was before. So let me play that again and listen for those few things. So there you have it. That is with, again, channel EQ, multiband compression, stereo spread enhancement, and a Brickwall limiter. So finally, let's hear again the before and after. So here's before. Cool. I hope that's been helpful for you. Again, we're doing this with the XR18. Now, these tools are available on different boards, different recording programs. There's different ways you could achieve the same thing. But we are using an XR18 as an outboard processor. Currently, the XR18 is, I think, $550 online. If that's a little bit steep for you, if you don't need the USB component of it, so if you're not streaming on OBS, then you can save some money and go with an XR12, which as of this moment is $299, so $300. And that again is rack mountable. It's a little bit smaller. It's definitely cheaper, and you really only need 2 inputs and 2 outputs, and this will do the rest for you. So I hope this has been helpful for you guys. If you have any questions or things that you've done that have been useful in this same vein, please feel free to leave a message in the comments below. And until next time, have a great week. Again, this is Chad from Ascension Worship. I hope this has been helpful for you and your team. Come back here every Tuesday for new information.